Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Before we begin today's comprehensive news analysis, an important announcement for all of you. There is an upcoming national scholarship test which gives you a chance to win up to 90% scholarship at Byju's IAS. The online test will be held on 28th of November 11 a.m. The registration link is given in the description of this video. Do remember the last date and time to register for this test is 27th of November, Saturday, 6 p.m. Let's begin today's discussion with the first article that talks about India's economic recovery post the pandemic crisis. The authors here say that India is witnessing a K shaped recovery instead of a V shaped recovery that we had hoped for earlier. Most optimistic thinkers in India were hoping for a V shaped recovery. V shaped recovery simply means that there is a decline in the economic activity, but after some time it goes back to the original pace. That is an ideal V shaped recovery. However, the authors say that India, instead of witnessing a V shaped recovery, is seeing a K shaped recovery. Now, what exactly do we mean by a K shaped recovery? In simple terms, K shaped recovery means that the economy is getting back on track. However, different sectors of economy are expanding at a different rate. Some sectors are getting back on track at their original pace, while some other sectors are not doing that well. The authors here gave a lot of examples to highlight their point and also tell where exactly is the government lacking. The authors here point out towards the government's taxation policy. The authors say that the government's taxation policy is still regressive in nature. Now, what do we mean by regressive taxation policy? See, there are two types of taxations. First, direct taxes, and second, indirect taxes. Direct taxes are the ones that you directly pay to the government, like your income tax, your corporate tax. Indirect taxes are the ones which you pay to an intermediary. For example, when you go and buy a biscuit of rupees 10, maybe out of those 10 rupees, 9 are going to the company's account. 1 rupee the company has to transfer to the government. That is called an indirect tax that you pay to the company, and the company will then pay to the government of India. Now, ideally, a taxation policy of the government should be as such that indirect taxes should be low and direct taxes should be higher. Why? Because direct taxes are usually proportional to your income. The more you earn, the more direct taxes you pay. So, the richer you are, the more direct tax you will pay. Indirect taxes, on the other hand, are problematic because they impact the poor people more. Why? Because if you buy a biscuit, a poor person buys a biscuit, or if the richest person in India buys a biscuit, all of us are paying the same tax. Indirect taxes are not related to your income level. That is why a taxation system where indirect taxes are more is called a regressive system that should be changed. So the authors say that the Indian government must change its taxation policy and focus more on collecting direct taxes rather than indirect taxes. The authors tell that the economy has shown very clear signs highlighting that the poor people have been impacted the most with this pandemic. For example, the two-wheeler sales in India are a very good indication of the purchasing power of the middle class in India. The two-wheeler sales in India have declined by 3 to 6% this year as compared to the last year. Although last year, when we were in the pandemic, the base was much lower. But this year, the number of sales of two wheelers are even lower as compared to the last year. Interestingly, the sales of high end premium cars and expensive motorcycles has not declined, which indicates that the rich people are still affording things that only they can, while the poor people and the middle class are not being able to afford things which they usually buy. The government has also increased taxes on products which are used by a lot of people around the country. For example, the government recently increased the GST on textile products from 5% to 12%, which again is an indication that indirect taxes are increasing, which will hurt the poor people and the lower middle class even more. There is official government data that suggests that over 50 lakh people lost their jobs in October. Apart from loss of income, these people also have to tackle the high food prices, high fuel prices, and increasing medical expenditure due to the flu and dengue season. A lot of these people who have lost their jobs are migratory workers who would have come to cities in search of jobs from the villages. When they lose their jobs, most of them go back to the village knowing that they at least have an option to work under the Manrega scheme. However, the author suggests that the budget allocation under the Manrega scheme has also been cut down by the government. In the year 2021-2022, the government of India's budget allocation towards Manrega was cut by one third. That means the government will not be able to pay the wages for Manrega workers on time, thus impacting them even more during the COVID 19 pandemic. The author suggests that India can learn from examples of developed nations such as US and Europe, where unemployment checks were given to people by the government. In the US, everyone got a check of $1,400 during the COVID 19 pandemic so that they can sustain themselves for their basic requirements. In India, that did not happen. The policy that the government adopted was to lower the corporate taxes, give more money in the hands of the industry, hoping that they would use that money to expand their business and then give more jobs to the people. But what happened was that the companies, when they had more money in their hand due to the reduction in taxes, they kept the money in their account. Rather than expanding their businesses, they kept the money with themselves, and the benefit did not transfer to the middle class and the poor people. The authors say that it makes much greater sense to give money in the hands of those people who are likely to spend that money rather than those people who are likely to save it. Because spending the money means the money is going back into the market, it's changing hands and bringing more economic activity in the country. Many people also argue that despite the COVID pandemic, the stock market of India is reaching higher levels every single day. But they forget the fact that only a 5% population of India is investing in the stock market. So, this avenue of making money is still largely restricted to a very small population in the country. Thus, the authors conclude by saying that the best way forward has to be for the government to focus more on direct taxes rather than indirect taxes, which hurt the poor people more. Now let's try and understand how exactly does a K-shaped recovery look like. So this is a graph which highlights a K-shaped recovery. When the COVID pandemic lockdowns were initiated, our economy took a downward jump as with many other countries across the world. After that, when the market started to open up, there was a resurgence in the market. However, after reaching a certain point, which was far below the original level, there were some sectors who started growing at a much faster pace as compared to the other sector. This is what gives it a K shape. That is, there are some sectors who are back at the original level or even doing better than that. Technology companies, white collar jobs, but blue collar jobs, small businesses, etc., are still to see that phase, and for them, their recovery has seen even a worse downward trend. Now, if you read economists throughout the world, you will see that these are not the only two recoveries that they talk about: V shaped, K shaped. Apart from them, there are many other graphs that the economists talk about. Let's see what are those different types of graphs. V shaped, we have already discussed. Then we have the L shaped recovery. This is very dangerous. It means that the economy came down to a very low level and is going back up, but at a very, very, very slow pace. This happened in Japan in the 1990s. It takes almost a decade for the economy to come back to the original level. Then we have the W shaped recovery. Essentially, W shaped recovery means there will be two dips in the market and not one. So the COVID 19 pandemic took the market here, it recovered, and then one more shock will be seen to take the market back to the lower level. This will be W shaped. Then we have a U shaped recovery. A U shaped recovery simply means that we are not sure when exactly do we have the worst point in our economy. It is difficult to understand when the good time will start. You are here, you are assuming that good time will start, but keeps falling downwards. So U-shaped recovery means without any clear lowest point. This usually is seen in cases of recession. Then we have the Nike swoosh recovery. So Nike's symbol, this is called swoosh. It indicates an economic sequence where there was a downfall, but the economy recovered very quickly. Then we have the Z-shaped recovery, where the economy grew very fast but was not able to sustain, went back at the lower level, and then again is going at a very fast pace. This is an example of an unstable economy where investors would like to avoid coming in the market. Then we have the double W shaped recovery, where the economy is going into recession multiple times after every 2 to 3 years. Then we have a square root shaped recovery, where the market fell down. It tried to come up, but it has reached a middle level and then it has stagnated over here. So it will not reach the original level again. It is just at the middle level and it is happy being at that level only. Then the K-shaped recovery, which we had already discussed in this article. The next article talks about how the COVID-19 pandemic has taken a bad turn once again in Europe. The most prosperous continent in the entire world, Europe was expected to perform much better as compared to the other nations across the world. However, for multiple reasons, Europe has again become the global hub of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the WHO also has issued statements that it is extremely worried about European situation right now. Last week, Europe reported about 2 million new cases in a week, which is the highest ever since the pandemic began in the beginning of 2020. More than half of the global deaths in the last month were just in Europe. Now, to understand Europe, you have to see the continent in two different parts: Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Western Europe is much richer, much more developed. Germany, France, UK, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, these are Western Europe. Then there are Eastern European countries, Hungary, Bulgaria, Australia, etc., which are lesser developed as compared to Western Europe. Western Europe has seen much higher vaccination rates as compared to Eastern, but that does not mean that the countries of Western Europe are not facing this trouble. Even the countries with very good vaccination rates are seeing this trouble of COVID-19 pandemic coming there once again. Thus, a lot of nations have taken very strict action. France, for example, started the policy of not allowing people to visit public places if they are not fully vaccinated. Many other countries are taking the same example. Austria, for example, imposed a national lockdown for 3 weeks starting from November 22. Although Austria has completely vaccinated about two-thirds of its population, it is still facing a lot of issues with COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this might also raise questions in the minds of people who believe that vaccination would completely stop the COVID-19 infection from catching you. That is not always true. Most daily cases that we are seeing in Europe are amongst the unvaccinated people, but there are some instances of breakthrough infections also. Breakthrough infection means infection to those people who have already been vaccinated. There is a little chance of you catching an infection even after your vaccination, but the good part is that if you are fully vaccinated, the chances of you needing a hospital or your health becoming very bad are very low. As the report also says, most of the deaths due to the virus are amongst the unvaccinated people and not those who have already taken the vaccination. Although there are multiple reasons why this might be happening in Europe, the one reason that the article suggests is that the countries only focus on vaccination while forgetting everything else. There was no national mandate to wear masks at the public places. People were not socially distancing themselves and were gathering at confined places. This may be one of the causes behind the worsening situation in Europe. Now, beyond this article, there are many other reports in the international media which suggest why exactly is Europe facing this trouble again. So, most of the cases in Europe that are coming up now are because of the Delta variant. This variant is extremely infectious, and to tackle this, the countries require an extremely high rate of vaccination. There are certain European countries where vaccination rates are very low. Russia has only vaccinated 37% of its population. In fact, the Russian president recently said that lower vaccination rate can be the reason behind the problems that we are facing. Bulgaria only 23, Romania only 37% people fully vaccinated. A contradiction to this is Belgium. Although Belgium has completely vaccinated 74% of its population, it is still one of the hardest hit countries in this wave of coronavirus, which indicates that to protect your population against the Delta variant, even 74% coverage is not enough, and the countries need to aim for at least 90% vaccination. But the problem in Europe is not the lack of vaccination, but people not wanting to get vaccination because of various ideas in their mind, including the idea that the government cannot force us to do anything. We are free to live our life in the manner that we want. The second reason that the international reports are suggesting is because of waning immunity. We always knew that taking vaccination against COVID 19 is not a one time exercise. These vaccinations will give you antibodies whose impact will start to reduce after some time. The reports suggest that for AstraZeneca's vaccine, the same that is named as Covishield in India, the a number of antibodies in your body start to decrease after 96 days. For Pfizer's vaccine, the number of antibodies start decreasing after 257 days. That is why there are a lot of reports suggesting that it is time for a booster shot. That also can be a reason why European population is again falling ill against the Delta variant. The third reason that international media suggests is released restrictions. In many of the European nations, elections are approaching, and the government does not want to make the people angry by forcing them to stay inside. Because of which, a lot of governments have opened up their countries, as I suggested, concerts, sports events, etc., are now completely allowed, which is leading to this problem resurfacing once again. There is a phrase that became very famous in India a few months back, which was revenge travel. Revenge travel means that since people could not travel anywhere in the entire year of 2020, now in 2021, people are compensating for that. Traveling even when it is advised not to, going to public places even when it is advised against it, just because they want to compensate for 2020. This also is leading to increased troubles in Europe. The next article talks about creating an even playing field between the internet companies and between the telecom companies. Let's try and understand what exactly are the authors talking about. The authors say that ever since data has become cheap, the telecom companies are at a great loss. Let me give you an example. About 10 years back or 12 years back, if someone in India had to call a person in America, they would have to pay international calling rates, or they would have to make a special recharge that would be very costly because it allows you to make international calls. Now, if your friend is in US, Europe, Australia, what you do is you call them on WhatsApp without paying any extra money because data is extremely cheap in India, and there's a perfect voice quality even on those calls. Although it has made your life easier and it has been extremely easy on your pocket, it has resulted in a great loss of revenue for the telecom companies. Not just this, the telecom companies also used to earn a lot of money through their SMS services. But now people hardly use SMS because when you want to send a message to someone, you usually use WhatsApp, Telegram, and other apps because the data is available to you at a very cheap cost. This has resulted in a loss of revenue for the telecom companies in India. Now, what exactly are the companies doing in India or abroad to expand their market? The authors here give an example of how telecom companies such as AT&T are working with Apple. Now, in the US, the number of people using iPhones, etc., is much more as compared to in India. There's a reason for that. In India, you pay 80,000, 1 lakh rupees to buy an iPhone, and then you use whatever telecom service that you want, Jio, Airtel, Vodafone, etc. In US, there's a different kind of a system. In US, when you buy an iPhone has a partnership with AT&T. AT&T is a telecom provider in the US, just like we have Vodafone or Idea in India. So when you buy an iPhone, that iPhone already has an AT&T number. This iPhone comes as a package where you pay a monthly fee, which includes a monthly installment for your phone also and your AT&T bill also. So for example, if I tell you in India, you can either buy iPhone for 1 lakh rupees and then use whatever SIM card that you want. The other option that you might have is that you can pay 5,000 rupees per month. The company will give you the iPhone along with an AT&T connection. The only condition is that you have to run this phone for at least 2 years. Now what would you prefer? Mostly people in the US prefer this kind of a deal where they get a phone along with the telecom operator. They just have to pay a small sum every month for a long term agreement, and the cost of the phone is not extremely high for them as a one time cost. In India also, Jio is now trying to come into a similar partnership with Google. But in India, that idea has not been extremely successful. The other way that telecom companies could have earned money in India is if they have more power over how data can be used. Let me give you an example. Few years back, Airtel had this system that when you do a data recharge from Airtel, it was not like 5 GB data and you can use it for anything. The data recharge used to be something like this, that you can buy 1 GB data which can only be used on YouTube, let's say for 100 rupees. Then you can buy 1 GB data which can only be used on WhatsApp. This is for 500 rupees. Why? Because the company also knows that with WhatsApp you can do international calling, so we will charge you more for that. So Airtel started this concept where the company will decide how you will use your data. You can use a data for a certain app only. This became very controversial, and people started to say that this is against the concept of net neutrality. Net neutrality means the telecom company should not decide how you use your data. The telecom company should just give you data 4 GB, 5 GB, or 10 GB. Then it depends upon the user how they want to use that data. Because in this method, the telecom company is telling you how to use your data, which goes against this concept. Because tomorrow, Airtel can also say that I will sell you 5 GB data, but that data can only be used for three apps: Facebook, WhatsApp, and YouTube. Then Telegram will feel very bad because people cannot use their data on Telegram. They will only have to use their data on WhatsApp, or they cannot use their data on Instagram, etc. They can only use for Facebook. So that will be against those companies and against the market competition. So the government stepped in and the government decided that we have to have net neutrality, and Airtel and other companies were told that you cannot these kind of plans. So Airtel and other companies had to stop these plans. So since then, the data plans that these companies sell are just for data, and they don't decide how you use your data. That is net neutrality. Now, the authors say that net neutrality is very good, but at the same time, there is also a need to have search neutrality. Now, what exactly do we mean by search neutrality? See, today, if you have to go to a website, 90% of the times you might not know the name of the website, you will just search on Google. For example, what if in Delhi there are 100 companies that make birthday cakes? Out of these 100 companies, let's assume 5 companies have paid money to Google. So whenever you do a Google search about best birthday cakes in Delhi, Google will only show you these 5 companies and it will hide the other 95. Why? Because Google is getting paid by these companies. This again is very similar to net neutrality. The authors say that Google has a responsibility, just like other telecom companies, to provide equal access to all the businesses. Google should not be allowed to display whatever search results that they want. Because as a consumer, when I am searching on Google, I am assuming that Google is treating every website equally. But that is not the case. There is no search neutrality. If Google tomorrow starts showing me some bad results, there is nothing I can do against Google. I'm not paying anything to Google, right? But Google is getting paid from the side of the businesses. So the authors here say that there should be an equal paying field for telecom companies, which are at a very bad position right now, and for internet companies. Just like we have a policy of net neutrality for telecom companies that they cannot differentiate, similarly for internet companies like Google, we must have a policy of search neutrality so that they can also not differentiate. Now, specifically about Google and other internet companies, they have been having a lot of issues with governments across the world, including India. So in India, Google is the largest advertiser. When you go to a certain website, you will see there are ads on the sides of the website or below the website. Those are usually Google ads. If you click on them, Google will pay some money to the website and an advertiser will pay money to the Google. For example, when you open the Times of India website, you would see there are ads of different cars or bikes or medical insurance that you can buy. These advertisers have paid Google to put their ads on the website. Now, Google earns most of its money through those ads. But the problem is when the Indian government tells Google to pay tax on that money that they're earning, Google says that we are not an Indian company. Why do we pay taxes to you? We are an American company. We have Indian clients, that is fine. But our company is in US, so we will only pay money to US government or some other government. Why would we pay you the money? Although most of Google India's client base is in India only, they are earning so much money from India, but they refuse to pay taxes. Same with Facebook. Facebook also earns all its money from ads, but when the Indian government asks them to pay some taxes here, they say, why do we have to pay taxes? We are an American company. And countries across the world are facing this problem. So in 2016 in India, the government started a system of equalization levy specifically for these companies like Google, Facebook, etc., that provide online advertisements. The law says that now these companies who are earning over 1 lakh rupees from Indian clients will have to pay a 6% tax to the Indian government no matter what. They can't escape this. And it is not just India, many countries across the world have started this system. Because what Google does is they will set up their headquarter in a country which has very little taxes. Usually, you will see most of these big companies have their headquarters in Ireland. So, Ireland is a nation which charges very low corporate tax. So, Google will tell everyone that we will pay taxes in Ireland because our headquarter is in Ireland. Ireland government says for corporate tax, okay, only give us 5%. So, Google is very happy. They only have to pay 5% tax in Ireland. In other countries, they will say, no, 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 we are already paying tax in Ireland. So, how do we pay you? This is why other countries have now started making their own policies, such as India has done with equalization levy. There is also a recent example of what happened in Australia with Google. So, media companies across the world have a big problem with Google. What is that problem? Let's take an example of Times of India, the Hindu or Hindustan Times, etc. When you go to their website, you see certain ads. These ads are put there by Google. Advertiser pays Google, and out of that money, Google will pay a very small amount to the Hindu or Times of India where they are displaying the ad. So the Hindu website is selling its website space to Google. Let's say for 5 rupees, Google will charge 100 rupees from the advertiser. So Google will take 95 rupees cut and 5 rupees they will give to the Hindu or Times of India. The problem here is in this entire system, Google does not even produce one single line of content. All the content that you read, all the content that you consume is made by the media companies. They are working hard, they are paying their news writers, they are paying their journalists. Google will just come put an ad and take 90% of the money and not even pay taxes there. So media companies across the world are very angry. So in Australia specifically, these media companies approached their government and said, please ask Google to pay us some money. Google first said, no, 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 we can't pay you any money because our policy is not this. We are based in Ireland, we will pay the taxes there. But Australia forced Google, saying that if you don't pay a fair share of your profit to the media companies who are working very hard, then we will not allow you to operate in Australia. This went on for many months, and now recently, Google has decided that okay, we will pay a share of our profit to the media companies who are making all the content. This is seen as a big win for Australia, and many other nations across the world, including India, France, etc., are now also planning to do the same, where media companies are coming together asking the government to force Google to share their profit with the media companies who are actually producing all the content. So don't be surprised if you see such kind of a law coming up in India also very soon. The next article is about the National Family Health Survey, whose detailed data has just come out on Wednesday. So, the National Family Health Survey number 5, its report was published earlier as well, but in parts. The complete data just came out this week. So, there is an article talking about the improvement that the country has made in different areas. First, the report says that the number of child taking birth in hospital or institutional facilities has improved by 8 percentage points, which is an extremely good takeaway as compared to the previous survey. However, the number of children who are stunted and wasted have only decreased by 0.3 percentage points, which is very disappointing for India. What exactly do we mean by wasting and stunting? So, when you say that a child is malnourished, malnutrition happens in different forms. Stunting means when people are shorter for their age. So, if a child is 10 years old or 5 years old but is much smaller in height as compared to other child of the same age, that child is called stunted. Wasting means people who are much thinner for their height. So, for a certain height, you should have a certain weight, you should have a certain circumference of your body. If that is not the case, then it becomes a case of wasting. Obesity means the opposite of wasting, people who are overweight. All these are cases of malnutrition. Let's look at the important pointers from this report as mentioned in this article. A very interesting takeaway is that India's total fertility rate has decreased to 2.0. Means the average number of child that a lady gives birth to now is 2.0, decreased from 2.2. So our rate of increase of population has decreased. As per the UN population division, if a country approaches a total fertility rate of 2.1, then the population will not increase over a long period of time, it will remain stagnant. Lower than this, the population might start to decline. So, if we maintain this fertility rate over a long period of time, India's population might start to decline. Over here, it is also important to note for China, the total fertility rate is 1.7. So their population decline will happen at a faster pace as compared to India. That is why reports suggest that India might become the most populous country in the world very soon. The report also says that the number of children who are completely vaccinated against various diseases has increased from 62% to 76%, and the number of children under 6 months who are being breastfed by their mothers has also improved and reached 63.7%. The proportion of children who are anemic means lack of iron in the body, is a worrying sign for India because the number of anemic children have actually increased when it should decrease. In fact, since 2018, the government of India has been running a program to cut down on the number of anemic children in the country, but the report suggests that that has not been successful. Not just children, the number of anemic men and women have also increased as per the survey, which is a greatly worrying sign for the government. Now let's go beyond the article and see what exactly is this survey all about and what exactly does it measure. So the National Family Health Survey is conducted by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare under the Government of India with the help of International Institution for Population Sciences in Mumbai. The data that they take is mainly to track the 30 sustainable development goals that the nation wants to achieve by 2030. As I said, since 2018, the government of India has been running a program called Anemia Mukt Bharat AMB, which is a part of Intensified National Iron Plus Initiative. While the program aims to reduce the number of people who are affected with anemia, as the survey suggests, this has not worked, and the number of people who are facing the issue of anemia has in fact gone up. Over here, I also wanted to share with you one interesting data point, that is, the nations having the highest fertility rates. These are the nations with top fertility rates. As you can see, almost all these nations are in Africa, and most of them are in the list of the poorest nations across the world, which means poverty and the total fertility rate have a direct proportion in most countries across the world. The next article is about an interesting policy decision by the Sri Lankan government that has backfired very badly on its own farmers. So, the story is that a few months back, the Sri Lankan president announced that we are banning the import of all the chemical fertilizers, saying that Sri Lanka will become the world's first completely organic country. Now, this sounds good, but such kind of a decision taken overnight can have disastrous impact, which is exactly what happened in Sri Lanka. There are multiple reports that suggest that whenever any country or any city opts for organic agriculture, it will always reduce the amount of crop production. That is a side effect of going organic. This happened when Sri Lanka's cropping season had already begun and the farmers were in need of chemical fertilizers. They could buy whatever was available in the market, but no import was allowed in the entire country. The government also announced that the farmers don't need to worry. If there is a loss of production, then the government will compensate them. The reason why the author is writing this article today is because of the ongoing protest in the entire country of Sri Lanka by farmers and other people who did not support this policy. The government finally, on 24th of November, was forced to lift this ban. So on 24th of November, the private sector was allowed to resume importing fertilizers from around the world and help the farmers with the supply. But between May and November, a lot of things happened in the country, which this article talks about. The article says that it is a well accepted practice that organic farming is a good initiative but extremely difficult to sustain. That is why only 1.5% of the global farmland is practicing organic farming. The president of Sri Lanka also did not take into consideration that the local production of fertilizers in Sri Lanka is far lesser than their requirement. Against a requirement of 15 million tons of compost, Sri Lanka only produced 3 million tons in the end of August 2021. This is where the story takes an interesting turn. When the protest started from farmers and other people against the policy, the Sri Lankan government said, okay, we will import some biofertilizers which are organic in nature. And they gave a contract to a Chinese company. Now imagine when you are expecting China to deliver something which is extremely pure, what will happen? So what happened was two Chinese companies were given this order, and the samples that these Chinese companies sent, both of them were contaminated. That is, both of them had chemicals and they were not organic at all, meaning that the plan again failed. Now, under increased pressure, the government of Sri Lanka had no option but to approach India, and the Indian organization IFCO, that is Indian Farmer Fertilizer Cooperative Limited, was asked to export their liquid nano N fertilizer to Sri Lanka. Now, there are two things that you must understand. Number one, this liquid nano fertilizer from IFCO has been tested to be completely organic. However, the nitrogen content in this liquid fertilizer is much lower than what the farmers actually require. 2.5 liters of this product only provides 100 grams of nitrogen, when the paddy crop requires at least 50 kg of nitrogen, which is much higher than what was given to them by the government. However, since there was no other option, IFCO got into action with the help of the Indian government, and we have started supplying this liquid fertilizer to Sri Lanka, which has now been given to their farmers. As expected, this has resulted in much lower production of food grains in the country. forcing the Sri Lankan government to import food from outside. Now, just look at the irony of this. The Sri Lankan government is importing food from outside, which again would not be organic. Means the same thing could have been produced in Sri Lanka itself if the government would not have banned these things. Realizing its mistake, the Sri Lankan government on 24th of November lifted the ban on chemical fertilizers and allowed the private sectors to import this. But the impact of lesser grain production will be seen in Sri Lanka in the coming weeks as well. Now, this story, as per the article, ends here, but there's a very interesting side note about this story. That is, it gives a chance for India to revive its relationship with Sri Lanka. Now, as we read in this article, when the Sri Lankan government needed organic fertilizers, they asked two Chinese companies to import it. Now, what happened was these Chinese companies were told that you send your fertilizers to Sri Lanka, and after the fertilizers come here, our People's Bank of Sri Lanka, which is also in China, will release the money to you. So, when they sent their fertilizers and Sri Lanka checked that they are not organic, there is contamination. Obviously, the People's Bank of Sri Lanka refused to give them the money, leading to the Chinese government becoming very angry. So angry that China has blacklisted People's Bank of Sri Lanka, thus deteriorating the diplomatic relations between the two countries. On the other hand, India has been trying to come closer to Sri Lanka now. How? A few weeks back, Sri Lanka requested $500 million of credit line from India because it is facing shortage of crude oil and it has to import more, and most probably India will agree to this. Not just this, India has also offered Sri Lanka to develop the oil tank farms to develop its own strategic oil reserves in Trincomalee, which is in the northeast coast of Sri Lanka. A few weeks back, there was also a news that India's Adani Group has finalized a project to develop the West Container Terminal at the Colombo port. In this project, the Adani Group will be a 51% majority stake partner, thus indicating that the relationship between India and Sri Lanka is on a rise and India is using this opportunity for its own benefit. Before I end this, there is another very interesting thing I wanted to share with you. We talk a lot about political dynasties in India, but let me show you how a real dynasty works. This is called the Rajapaksa dynasty. The Rajapaksa family in Sri Lanka controls 24% of Sri Lanka's entire budget. So Gotabaya Rajapaksa is a Sri Lankan president right now. He is also the Minister of Defense and Minister of Technology. His brother Mahinda Rajapaksa is the Prime Minister. Along with that, he also handles Finance Ministry, Cultural Affairs Ministry, Urban Development Ministry. Their other brother, Basil Rajapaksa, is the chairman of Presidential Task Force for Economic Revival. Another brother, Chamal Rajapaksa, is the Minister of Irrigation, Home Affairs, Security, Disaster Management. Their sister's son, Nipun Ranawaka, is a member of parliament, and so on. Out of the total 30 cabinet posts in Sri Lanka, 7 of them are handled just by the Rajapaksa family. Now, this is what you call a real political dynasty. These are the articles I wanted to discuss from today's Hindu newspaper. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Throw light on the biggest roadblocks in the delivery of nutrition interventions to pregnant women in India. Suggest ways to tackle this problem. Second, to revive the fortunes of India's telecom sector, there needs to be a similar regulatory policy for telcos and internet companies. Do you agree? Give reasons to justify your stand. Both of these have to be answered within 250 words. Thank you so much for watching the video.